שלום רב לקהל
Distinguished audience, I
האמת
also
שגם לי יש
have
זיכרונות
memories from
מהמקום
Van
הזה,
Leer
עוד לפני שהוא נבנה.
before it was built. I would like to begin with an excerpt from an interview held with the writer Aaron Appelfeld in the context of the group Memory and Debate, which operated from 2013 to 2015 in the Van Leer Institute. For the sake of the audience that came from abroad, I will say that Aaron Appelfeld is one of the most important Israeli writers. He was a child during the Holocaust and survived the Holocaust. He's written many books and has been mentioned many times as a candidate for the Nobel Prize. We hope that that will happen. He was born in Chernovitz. He was a child of 8 or 9 when the Holocaust began. An only child. His father was a lawyer. His mother was a university graduate, a middle-class family. Just to describe the scene, his playroom was so far from where his mother usually sat that she would whistle to him with a whistle when she wanted him to come. So that was the reality in which Aaron lived as a child. And within a few months, he was all alone in Transnistria, who had to survive in the face of a world that wanted to kill him. I met Aaron on a journey to Bukovina and Transnistria in the 1990s for the educational television to create a film about his life. Knowing him from the time I started out as a curator in the Yad Vashem museums complex influenced my view of the world in general and of the Holocaust in particular. In the interview, he answers my question regarding what his strongest memory of the Holocaust is when he was a child. These memories are connected to a lot of love. I'm sorry, the sound quality is very poor. Those who saw how mothers protected their babies and children, how parents refused to eat and gave the food to their children, this endless love for their children. Everything was catastrophic. Everything was death. But at the same time, there was a great deal of love. How young people stayed with their parents in order not to leave them alone. When I ask myself where they drew the strength from, it was not where I draw my strength from. It was not from the horrific sights. It was from a place of love. There was, on a personal level, a self-sacrifice on an unbelievable level. Self-sacrifice, literally. People who were on the verge of death, and they instinctively knew. I'm sorry, I can't hear what he's saying. To say nothing of having only a few bites of bread to eat, on the verge of death, there was a great deal of love. I am a person of museums rather than a historian of the Holocaust. By the nature of my pursuits, I focus on materials that are more personal, that allow me to personify the overall story, and thus cause the visitor to take an interest in the subject of the exhibition. In the exhibitions I curated and articles I wrote, which dealt mainly with issues related to women and children, I found a riveting story hiding under the national narrative. This narrative was political from the outset praised and glorified the physical fighting on the one hand and behavioral attributes of victimhood, of lambs to the slaughter on the other, thus providing proof that the whole world is against us and we are the eternal victim and there's no choice but to fight. Leading this in the immediate aftermath of the war were the Zionist left-wing parties who embedded the theme of rebellion and resistance as a major attribute of the Jewish state and emphasized the affiliation of the participants in the uprising in their movements and parties. They inserted it into the Israeli ethos until it became a second Masada. Later, too, despite the rise in the importance of the non-physical resistance, this approach has not disappeared and, of course, makes the behavior of the rest of the Jews seem inferior and pathetic. It reached its peak when it was adopted by the Israeli right, marking the 70th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. In his speech, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on a Holocaust Memorial Day in 2013 at Yad Vashem, and I quote, "In the depths of the darkness, there was a big shift in the fate of the Jews in the death camps and ghettos. In the Warsaw Ghetto, Jewish history changed. There was re-established Jewish resistance. They discovered the spirit of the Maccabees. The flag of revolt was again hoisted. The fact that they lost this war does not diminish the heroism of those people and the great transformation they brought about in our history. From helpless victims, the defenders of the ghetto fighters became fearless fighters." Holocaust survivor and historian Professor Israel Gutman, and if I may say a close friend of mine, was also the historian of the museum. And he explained already in the early days of our acquaintance that it was almost impossible for Jews not to die in the Holocaust. The few that tried to fight the Germans actually were choosing another way to die. What he wanted to say was that this almost always meant that other Jews who did not choose that path, who wanted to live another day, another minute, they were the ones that paid for it. Every day those dealing with evil and genocide know that the Holocaust is one of the cruelest and most terrible events of murder in human history. All of Europe was defeated by the German armies. The Jews, who had no country or army, and the purpose of the Germans was to kill them to the last person, and they had no chance against them, also due to the assistance lent to the Germans by local residents for reasons of anti-Semitic reasons and economic reasons. The expectation in such a terrible situation that Jews would abandon their humanity and be dragged into a violent struggle among themselves too. But if we look at the behavior of the majority of the Jewish public, I would dare to say that this was led by women, but of course many men behaved so too. We see that the true picture is that the Jews were killed, but they did not behave like victims. Of course, everyone had their own breaking point, but looking at the overall picture, even among many of the children, their lives were meaningful, full of energy and creativity, behavior that saw the other and supported them on their way to death. Without such behavior, no survival, even for a short time, was possible. People took responsibility for one another, whether they were family members or not. Adults took responsible for young people and gave them support at the most difficult moments imaginable. Children cared for their parents, and religious and secular people reached out to each other at significant moments. The alternative families set up by women in the camps were the embodiment of human good. This is a first-class moral lesson on how to deal with suffering and evil, not to adopt it, but to respond on the human level and to preserve human dignity. Appelfeld spoke about this, about the light that shone more because of the darkness, about the points of light and the love that made the Holocaust a universe symbol of human coping with death. And not only the adults behaved in this way, so did the children. 1.5 million children who were stars without a sky, the weakest link and the most helpless people, they too demonstrated extraordinary behavior. In many cases, they supported their families, encouraged their parents to continue the desperate struggle for survival, and planted hope in them. At the same time, they behaved just like all children, playing, laughing, creating, and expressing their fears and hopes. Dunya Rosen was a young girl, 10 years old, while hiding alone in a pit in the forest. Donia thought she was the last Jewish person in the world. In her will, which she wrote on a piece of paper on June 23rd, 1943, this week, 73 years ago, she wrote, "I want you to build a monument for us, reaching up to the sky, a monument the whole world will see, not of marble or stone, but of good deeds, because I firmly believe that only a monument of this kind can ensure you and your children a better future. The few that survived, who even after the Holocaust encountered pogroms and hate, did not look back, and their fervent desire was to quickly rebuild their lives, but they wanted to prevent a similar fate from others and worked to that end. One of the first things survivor organizations did was to actively establish an international convention on the status of refugees. This convention was signed in 1951 in order to ensure protection for people persecuted in their own countries who were forced to flee to save their lives. In this convention, such people are defined as refugees. 26 countries, including the young state of Israel, participated in drafting the Refugee Convention. Although there is no single will, we can see in all these behaviors a spiritual testament left by those who went to their deaths and those who survived. And in this will, there are three words: see the other. These are the people and acts that should be our moral benchmark. That behavior can serve as a concrete inspiration even in the main things in our life, such as to end the occupation that has lasted 50 years and has made the Palestinians a disadvantaged people lacking basic rights, and has also led to self-destruction and moral destruction. But even for seemingly smaller topics, as it were, for example, the callous behavior towards African refugees to whom we do not apply the title of refugee and try to drive them out in any way. Also relevant is the war in Syria, which has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. It's just a half an hour from Safed, 2 hours from Tel Aviv, and 3 hours from here. But it seems like an ocean separates us from the tragedy taking place there. In September 2012, when the battles were at a relatively early stage, but the number of fatalities was increasing, I thought during sleepless nights of the Kindertransporten from Germany to England and how a single person managed against all odds to save 5,000 children. In my despair, I wrote a letter to Haaretz, and I proposed opening the border to allow children from Syria to enter Israel. I spoke about only a limited stay. The letter was printed, and the letter was not printed. And then I asked Michal Ravner, and we spoke about it. And together, we tried for a long time to bring children from Syria to Israel. We failed, although I must say that a lot of people along the way were kind, including senior politicians and people from the right and the left who agreed to accept children into their homes. Some said, bring 2 children, because I don't speak Arabic, and that way they can talk to each other. But someone was needed to declare that the border was open for this purpose, and every time it failed again and again. Later, some wounded Syrians came to Israel, including children, and they received treatment in hospitals in the northern thanks to hospital directors with an open heart and public courage. The question why it was not possible to bring children to Israel before they were injured remains open and painful. That is why we need today more than ever inspiration from those people who during one of the darkest periods in human history, they had compassion in their hearts and courage and determination in their physically weak bodies. They are the ones who tell us today to concede honor and aggression, to see the weak, see the other, and give them what you have. As those who deal with these issues up close and who sometimes feel that we have no skin separating us from the events that we teach and impart to our students, we must be the torchbearers of that message. Chavka Folman Rabban, who was a courier in the Holocaust and survived Auschwitz-Birkenau, said at the torch-lighting ceremony in 2013 in the ghetto fighters' kibbutz, continue the rebellion, another rebellion, against all evil, against that which has harmed our one and only beloved land. Rebel against racism and violence and hatred of the others, inequality, disparities, poverty, avarice, and greed. Rebel against the occupation. No, we must not rule over another people. We must not humiliate anyone. The most important thing is to achieve peace and end the cycle of bloodshed. My generation dreamed of peace. I so want to live to see it. You have the power to help. All my hopes are pinned on you. Let it be.